as decided before the program, let me introduce a little bit about Dr. Muhammad Shamil Islam. Uh, so far, I have known, we have understood about his identity. He has finished his BBA and MBA both program from University of Dhaka, Bangladesh. And apart from that, he has finished his PhD program from University of Science Malaysia, USM. And he has demonstrated a very notable publication. I mean, research skill in publications, like in a very good journal. I have uploaded his site, Google site, where you can see his exhibition of good research skill. There, so far I have seen right now, he has published paper in Journal of Cleaner Production. Its impact factor is 7 plus, and he has published in other one. This is what, reservation or conservation and recycling journal, and also he has published another paper in Journal of Logistics. This kind of thing. These three, they are very good journal. So I'm not making any detail. Let me welcome our main guest, our main speaker, Dr. Muhammad Shamil Islam. Would you please, we are on live now. Would you please talk something about what you are going to show, and at the same time, would you like to start now by showing or exhibiting your PPT or whatever you have? Thank you, Dr. Muhammad Shamil Islam. We are very privileged to be here. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. It's my privilege to be here in this platform. Assalamu alaikum and very good night today. So today, as the moderator has already discussed, the topic of this session is the writing the literature review of a research paper. So without further ado, I would like to share my screen, the presentation with you. Okay. So, writing literature review for a research paper. This is the session that today we are going to address. So, as we know, we have different types of literature. If we talk about writing a systematic literature review paper, so that would be a different discussion. But today our focus will be particularly on writing literature review for a research paper. So that should be clear at first, because we have some objectives from this session. So those who are here to learn about how to write my literature review in my research paper, so this session is for those audience. So today actually I arranged my presentation with a kind of mixed mode, we can say, because I have included another aspect, that is the ideal structure of the research paper into writing literature review in a research paper. Means today we are going to address parallelly two important aspects of a research paper. One is ideal structure of a research paper, as well as the style of writing literature review of a research paper. So today we are going to address these two important components of a research paper. So at first, I would like to demonstrate about the ideal structure of a research paper. So as you see in this slide, At first, this is the typical, structure. You may not find this in every paper you have read, but the paper, especially from the publisher of Elsevier, so you'll find this is the typical structure they follow. At first, you'll find there is a title of the paper, then there is highlights, and in the highlights, uh, you will find the highlights only in the website, in HTML format. But if you download the paper and if you see in the PDF, you may not find the highlights inside the paper. That is very interesting thing. So the highlight, sorry, then you'll find abstract keywords, and in some papers related to economics, you'll find JEL codes. And then introduction, then literature review, then methodology, results and discussion, conclusion, acknowledgement, references, and final author bibliography. So at first, in the title, we know that at the beginning, you will find the title. Let me show you some examples so that resource conservation and recycling, there's a journal, and there's a title of the paper. So then highlights, as I said, if you see inside the PDF, you may not find the highlights, but you will find it in the HTML format if you browse it through some web browser like Mozilla or Firefox, some web browser. Then you will find they have presented highlights just after the title. Then the abstract. So there's the abstract, and then introduction. Okay, and after that you have literature review, then methodology. Okay, so there's the typical structure of the paper, of a research paper from a renowned publisher. So I am emphasizing that this structure is the ideal structure. Means if you write a research paper, we should maintain this typical structure because it came from the reputed publisher. So then today, since our focus is to write literature review of the research paper, so then I decided to confine my discussion within up to method section, because the issue of literature review you will mostly find is limited until the method section, and after that there is no issue of writing when citing the literature. So that's why today my discussion will be focused from title until the methodology, so that we can address the issue of literature review section. So now this is very important. As I said, I would like to highlight two important aspects of a research paper. One is the ideal structure. Second is writing literature review. Okay, at the beginning, what is the contents of introduction section. So in a typical research paper, if we see, if we take this paper as the example paper, as the sample paper, and we want to see what are the contents normally we present in introduction section. Okay. At the beginning, typically, ideally, we will find the paper presents the background or issues at first. Now let's see how this paper presented the issues or background at the beginning. So this is the introduction. So at first we need to see the title. The title is Assessing Green Supply Chain Practices in Bangladesh using fuzzy importance and performance approach. So using fuzzy importance and performance approach, it is part of methodology, and assessing green supply chain, that's the, the area of research, or we can say the field of research, that is green supply chain practice. So at the beginning, what do we expect? We want to see there is a discussion about green supply chain, about green supply chain. Okay. So they have presented the leather industry, how it is vulnerable to the environment, then why the industry is facing pressure from the government or from the different agencies, and then the issue of integration of environmental concern into supply chain practices is referred to as green supply chain practices. So at first, in the beginning, the first section, first paragraph of introduction section, we find the topic sentence. The background or issues that the field of research have been discussed briefly in the first paragraph. Okay. So there's the issue. Ideal contents of introduction section. At the beginning, we expect that the paper should present the background or issues. And after that, the paper should address the problem statement. So this paragraph is a combination. This paragraph is the combination of both the elements. That is the background as well as the problem statement. So here the problem statement is very clear, means we need to highlight a real life problem. Sometimes some papers, they may not present the real life problem. They only present the research problem. So we need to understand what is real life problem and what is my research problem. So you see that here I present this paper presents the real life problem at first, that the industry is facing acute pressure. That's the problem of the industry. They are facing environmental pressure, from different agencies. So that is real life problem. And from that, we see the we linked real life problem into the topic of the uh, paper, that is the green supply chain practice. And then we need to present the gap in the literature. Sometimes it is called the gap of knowledge, sometimes it is called the deficiency in practice. So then you see here the second paragraph is talking about the literature. So gap in the literature, gap of knowledge, deficiency in practice. These all are same thing. So in the second paragraph, we need to link our problem in the literature. So that's why in the beginning, this paper present very clearly in the literature what is happening. So in the literature, so many things happened, and then it linked the objectives. Okay, so sometimes you may not find the gap in the literature in the very next paragraph. This paper, they present the objectives in the second paragraph, but this paper presents the gap in the literature because it is not clear. Thus, an appropriate method is essential. So, we talk about different methods. Previous studies have applied different methods, but these methods somehow is unable to, identify the problem that this paper is going to address. So that's why this paper actually wants to contribute by presenting a hybrid method. So the contribution of this paper would be a different method. So then you'll find the introduction papers, they present the purpose, aims, and objectives. So this paper is very clear. What is the objective of this paper? Then research questions. So sometimes you will find the list of research questions, and sometimes you may not find the list of research questions. So this paper, say they presented the list of research questions 1, 2, and 3. So then the typical introduction section sometimes contains the introduction to the method, means what method I am going to apply. We need to mention very briefly in the introduction section. So this paper is, since this paper is trying to present or contribute a different methods, this paper already discussed about the methods in this paragraph. Yeah. So then you'll find next section, this next component of this introduction section, that is contributions to the literature, policy, or managerial. So you need to highlight the contribution. So this paper is very clear. It starts a separate paragraph by highlighting its contribution. You'll find all other contributions it mentions in this paragraph. So then at the end, linked to the remaining sections or overall structure of the paper, means we need to direct the audience, I mean the readers, to the rest of the papers. So here it presents a separate paragraph stating the structure of the rest of the paper. So it says the rest of the paper is structured as follows, for example. So there's the ideal contents of introduction section. So now the issue of literature. So how we have incorporated the literature review issues with the introduction. Now let me go from the beginning. So once we are very clear about the important components of introduction section, then we need to justify each and every argument that I have presented in my paper by appropriate citations, by appropriate references. For example, at the beginning we said the leather industry has been relocated from the developed world to the developing world primarily of being the cause of environmental vulnerability. So, sorry, find it. So there's a claim, there's a statement. Sometimes some statements is very logical, very rational, but sometimes some statements needs justifications. Otherwise, the reviewers or the editors or the readers, they might have a doubt that how the author of this paper presents or presented this kind of statement. Is it from their own opinion, or it is from this statement is from the literature, or someone has already verified or established this statement? So it is better whenever you will find this kind of issues that people may argue about the source, then it is better to justify your statement using a reference. Sorry. So there's understanding. So next, we presented that accordingly, this industry has been established in Bangladesh due to having indigenous raw materials. Although each year the industry earns a considerable amount of foreign currencies. You see, this paper claims the industry earns a considerable amount of foreign currencies. So the reader may argue, who said this? Is it your statement, or you have some statistical data or documents? So now, this kind of statement, you may not find it from previous studies, right? So now, whenever we talk about, justification, references, literature, we always focus on previous studies, but sometimes it doesn't work. You see, it depends on what statements you have presented and what statement or what sources, what are the sources that can justify properly. For example, here, this paper, they presented the Export Promotion Bureau of Bangladesh Statistics. So this works perfectly because it came directly from this source, right? So this is very important. Sometimes we cite previous studies as a secondary source, but this one, because this information is from your government statistics, right? So if you can cite directly from the source, so it is justified strongly. So these are the things we need to understand. So then it said it is facing acute pressure in the form of government regulation due to environmental degradation. So here, sometimes we we study something. This is very location specific means your local issues. So very few studies they have discussed about this, maybe. So that's why sometimes we may not find previous studies, but we need to justify our claims, our arguments, our statements. So in that case, if you don't find literature, previous studies, then we have many alternative sources to justify. So here you can justify using, by citing newspaper article or some reports from local or national agencies. So sometimes we need to open our mind, not to confine ourselves only the studies, only the literature review. Okay, sometimes you may not find it using the Google Scholar or using the Scopus or Web of Science. So in that case, we need to find alternative avenues, and these are the your newspapers, government statistics, and local and international agencies, their reports. Okay, so sorry, whenever you want to present some statement, or you argue something, means you want to present the motivation of your paper. So you need to justify to some extent each and every claims that you have made. Otherwise, uh, we can easily doubt about these issues, whether these are true or not, these are real or not. So you see, the first paragraph contains citations, and this is part of, your literature review. Okay, so then, because of the government regulations, okay, hence the industry urgently need to take care of the environmental issues. Cheng et al. Highlight that manufacturer can overcome environmental regulatory pressure by integrating environmental concern into their supply chain practices. So you see, so Cheng et al. Highlights. Now, I need to address one issue here. We have two types of citation. One is head citation and another is tail citation. So this one start at the beginning of the statement. Cheng et al. Highlight that. So this is called the head citation. And now here we see another citation and this is presented at the end, and it is called tail citation. It is called tail citation. So now, which one we should use and where we should use this? Okay, that's this question might be arised. So whenever we are going to present a strong claim, this is my, I mean the key argument, then it is better to use more and more head citations like this one. And when the statement is not so important, I mean, it is not part of my problem statement, or it is not part of my literature gap, so then in that case we can present the citation at the end. So this is the tail citation. So this is the head citation and present a very strong claim that manufacturer can overcome environmental regulatory pressure by integrating environmental concern into their supply chain practices. So then the integration of environmental concern into supply chain practices is referred to as green supply chain practices. So here I can present more than one citation, but here only one, right? We cannot present two at the beginning. If you want to present the two, you can have another statement separately. But here we have option, the tail citation, to add more than one citation. So that's the advantage. Sometimes we cite our own papers. It is not a crime. Okay, we can cite our own papers, and this is very useful for your citation, for increasing the number of citations. But cite which are relevant. Okay, so you can present number of your papers like this way, and that's not a crime if it is relevant. Okay, and then you see in the literature, Mr. Chang presents that integration of environmental concern. So you see there is another head citation. Okay, this is head citation. This is another head citation. Present GSP as a hands-on solution to operation manager. Okay, so here I am building my claim. I am supporting my statement by citing more than one papers. These three talk about the same thing. So that means to support your one argument, sometimes you can refer more than one paper. Okay, that's not a problem. It will strengthen your argument. Okay, and then about the methods. Previous studies, they used different methods. Who has used and which method? Okay, they have employed a different method. You see, in the same context, assessing green supply chain practices. So to assess green supply chain practices, previous studies applied different methodologies. And in the introduction section, I want to highlight some of them, not all, some of them. Okay, so now the issue is, how can I identify these papers? They talk about assessing green supply chain practices, right? So I'm going to show you an hands-on experience right now using the Google Scholar. Okay, so this is the Google Scholar we use almost regularly. So the issue is here, let's see, assessing green supply chain practices. And I want to see what methods previous studies used to assess green supply chain practices. That's the objective of my search in the Google Scholar. So to do this, let's write few keywords. First, assess. Then, green supply chain. Okay. Now, better to put green supply chain practices so that it detect 3 words consecutively. Otherwise, it derive the results wherever it find green, then somewhere supply or somewhere chain it will derive. So to make it congested into 3 words, so we have made this quotation. So now we want to see what are the papers they assess green supply chain practices. Right. You see, now you can find so many papers. A new holistic conceptual framework for green supply chain management performance assessment based on circular economy. Okay. You see, the assessing green supply chain practices in Ghanaian and mining industry, a framework and evaluation. Okay. You'll find inside the papers that they use different methodology. If you want to see particularly if there is any title that mention methods in the title, then we can add another keywords to see whether any papers they particularly mention the method in assessing green supply chain practice in the title, so that we can shortlist very quickly. Now we have more than 21,000 papers. You see, right? So now you see, using fuzzy DEMATEL. This is the method you already find in the title. No need to read the full text of this paper. You already found that fuzzy DEMATEL. Then, is there anyone? Oh, you see another one. A hierarchical fuzzy topsis. Another one. Amazing. Application of fuzzy beaker. Now, how many citation you need just to write this paragraph? Within few minutes, I have shown you that how easily you can identify your desired literature papers to support or to write or to justify your statements, right? So sometimes, whenever we search in the Google Scholar, for example, we search using green supply chain, then, oh, more than 43,000 papers. So we call it the issue of information diffusion. So we fall in information diffusion. How can we, narrow down it, shortlist it, or how can I, find out my desired information from this, abundant information. So sometimes you will face it if you are unable to make a query in this search, strip. So we need to understand how to search in the databases. Okay, many ways. There are many ways. We need to, try, do some trial and error. Okay, so that you can, understand the process. So it's not very easy for the beginners. Okay, beginners will find some difficulties, but if you can, practice it more, then you will understand what keywords you should put inside the, in databases to, get your desired results very quickly. So this is, how we, justify each and every, you know important statements, arguments, my key arguments, or some statements that requires justifications. Okay, then you see there is another one, Marshilla. Basically he's the pioneer who developed the IPA method, importance performance, approach. So regarding the measurement, we talk about some measurement structure here in the introduction section. Again, you can cite one or two, references. Then you talk about the measurement. Again, you talk about the measurement and also methods, measurement and methods. Again, since this paper is talking about the fuzzy set theory, so who is the pioneer of fuzzy? We need to, mention this fuzzy. For example, if we talk about the, uh, PLS, I mean the partial least square structural equation modeling. So we need to present some gurus. Who are the guru? Okay, who are the pioneers? Who has contributed in the development of this concept? Okay, we need to, present some old references. You see, 1965. So that's not the issue of, last 5 years. So as most of us, we use a golden rule, that is last 5 years rule, right? To cite your literature review. So sometimes, we need to go before our independence, right? So it depends. So what statements, what statement you're going to be justified. So, so here, the issue of fuzzy set theory is not new. So it has been developed in the year 1965 by Jade. So we need to, present even some old references. So that's not a crime. That's not a, bad practice. So we need to, keep in mind those issues also. And then here we talk about the previously some papers. They use the same method, but in different context. In textile or in, I say, other industries. Okay, no problem. You can cite those, papers. You can say this is not first. I mean the me that I am going to introduce this method. Rather, this method already been verified and tested in other industry context. Maybe tourism, maybe hospitality, maybe textile, but you want to apply it in a different industry context or in a different, issues like in green supply chain, practices. So previously, very few studies has used the same method in assessing green supply chain practices. That's why this paper claims basically that this is the contribution here. So again, the method we are going to use, we need to present is very briefly in introduction section, and we need to justify the method is valid or reliable, because previously some studies they have tested this method in different contexts or in other countries, for example. So then you move on, right? So then the contribution. In contribution, you may not need more justifications. Okay, I mean the citations here, since it claims that lack of scientific study on green supply chain from Bangladeshi context. Since I am presenting a new, I mean this paper is presenting a new uh, contribution, contextual contribution. So that's why it needs a justification. That's why this paper present a reference. So otherwise, in contribution, you may not need like references. Okay, then so we just finished the introduction. At first, we discussed the ideal contents of the introduction section, and then we discussed the how we can integrate no what how we can integrate the literature, how we can integrate the literature into the introduction section. So then we'll move on to the next section, that is the literature review section. So this is the, I mean, this very second section of the research paper. That is, after introduction, normally we see there is another heading titled as literature review, right? So at first, I will discuss the important elements or the essential contents of the literature review sections. Then, side by side, I will discuss how we can incorporate the literature to justify each and every claims or arguments I have made. I mean the paper made. Okay. So first, what are the essential contents? We talk about relevant literature of definitions, terminologies or terms, focus of research, area of interest, etc. So, if my paper contains some terminologies that is not very general, that is not very generic, very specific to some disciplines. So we need to discuss those terms very clearly. So better I should not present from my own opinion. because you need to remember the section is literature review. Whatever I am presenting in this under these headings, that should not be my opinion. That should not be my discussion. Instead, that should be from the literature. This is very important because I have started literature review section. So whatever I am presenting need to be justified by previous studies. After that, we need to identify gaps of knowledge deficiency in practice in details. In introduction, we presented very briefly the gaps of knowledge. But in literature review, we need to extend this so that the readers can easily understand what is the gap in the literature. And then typically we see in typical paper, they find the hypothesis development along with literature review section. Sometimes we see some, uh, the heading, they call it literature review and hypothesis development. That's the heading. So it's not a crime, it's not a bad heading as well. You can make it, no problem. So you can combine literature review as well as the hypothesis development, section into one section, that is the literature review. No problem. And why I have written the optional hypothesis development, you may not find in all papers this section. Then typically you will find there is a section called proposed method. Means the method that we are going to undertake, apply. So we need to justify this method from previous studies. Then the proposed measurement scale or the measurement structure or the instrument, sometimes we call instrument, or the measurement model or measurement framework, whatever we call it, the scale, how I am going to assess or evaluate or measure my issues or the problems. So these are the typical ideal contents of literature review section. Okay, now let's see how it reflects in the real life scenario. So as I said, this is the typical. So you may not find all the contents into a single paper. Okay, all the contents, it may not match in a single paper. But if you read few papers, several papers, then you will find these are the basic components. These are the essential components of the literature review section. So here, this paper that we have started, this paper, assessing green supply chain practice. Number 2 heading is not literature review. They talk about theoretical background. Okay, theoretical background. So now, theoretical background is also part of literature. Maybe the beginners may not know it, but most of the reviewers, editors, they know this is part of literature review, the theoretical background. So here we need to justify our issues, our topic, from previous studies or from previous theories. Okay, so you talk about green supply chain at the beginning. As I said, ideal component. Talk about relevant literature of definitions, terminologies, terms, focus of areas, research of interest, etc. So here, there's the term green supply chain, and that need to be discussed clearly to give an idea to the readers that what is green supply chain. And interestingly, I should not give or I should not present my opinion on this topic. Rather, I should present what is this from previous studies. That's the issue. Okay, from previous studies. Because the issue is here literature. We need to keep it in mind always that at this section I already started writing literature. Okay, so whatever I am presenting, I need to cite it from literature. So here you can justify or you can present about this concept from different studies. We should not say authors from different authors, no, from different studies. Here sometimes I see some paper they present this author presents. Okay, they directly say, right, they present the author presents. No, this is not the ideal process of writing paragraph, writing a paper. Always mention about studies. Another one, we should not say scholar, better to say studies, previous studies. Okay, so you see we have defined, we have given definition, use several common terms. So basically this paragraph talk about what is green supply chain from the literature. Several studies of importance of green supply chain. So then you see we have head citation, we have tail citation also. In tail citation you can present more than one papers, but head citation only one. Okay. So this you see talk about green supply chain. So now we need to keep in mind that this section we need to present our literature gap. You remember the gap of knowledge or deficiency in practice in details, right? So that doesn't mean that you need a separate section. You need a separate section under the literature review titled as Gap of Knowledge. No. Instead, you need to present or you need to argue the gap of the knowledge wherever you will find the scope. Okay? Wherever you will find the scope. For example, in green supply chain, this is simply a concept, right? But here, you see, this paper try to criticize previous, highlight the importance. Since the leather industry is currently suffering environmental studies on green supply chain management are essential to offer a practical solution. You see, this paragraph at the end, the second paragraph basically, first paragraph talk about the concept purely, second paragraph relate this concept into the context, right? Into the context. Okay. Then it talk about the importance of this study. So this is how we try to argue the gap. We try to present the gap of knowledge, and we try to present the importance of this study in the literature. Okay, wherever you will find inside the literature review, you need to present the gap or highlight the importance of this study. So now we talk about green supply chain practice. This is another terminology. First one, green supply chain. Then this one is talk about practice. So again, what is practice from previous studies? Okay, previous studies. From previous studies. So better to keep it, within 5 years. Okay, this is the golden rule. Always we need to, remember. I suggest if you can, you just confine your literature within 3 years, last 3 years, it will be better. Okay, then again you see, first concept, then this is also part of concept. What is green supply chain practice in different industries? Okay. So you see, it says at the end, thus green supply chain practice are diverse as well as industry specific, and hence are implemented through various practices and initiatives. Nevertheless, a new set of measures is required to address the skills and capabilities of leather industry. So here, this paper contributes a new measurement scale, and that's why it highlights the importance of a new measurement, of a new measure, the why it is required. So this is another gap it identified. Okay, so you see, this section, the literature review sections, it tries to highlight the gaps everywhere in details, but in introduction we highlighted the gap very briefly. So now we talk about again green supply chain practices, and You talk about, okay, and to summarize, assessing green supply chain practices comprehensively is first action towards successful implementation. So basically, uh, it highlights the importance of a new measurement scale. It highlights the importance of assessment of green supply chain practices, right? To this end, identifying the level of practice and importance and the performance aspect can lead to a comprehensive understanding. So, as well as it identified or it highlighted the importance of the method it used. Okay, so basically, wherever you find, you need to identify your gap, as well as you need to present strongly why this study is important. This study is essential in the literature. Okay, this is important. Everywhere, wherever you'll find this scope. Okay, not just in the introduction. You need to present it in literature review section. So you see the proposed methods. Proposed method. Okay. So the method this study applied in analyzing the data. So it highlighted from it justified from previous studies. That previous studies also apply different method, but we need IPA technique for an assessment tool. So then you have to justify from previous studies what is IPA, right? So you need a logical flow from top to bottom. So at the beginning, we talked briefly about different methods they assessed in the uh, assessment of green supply chain practice from previous studies. You remember this thing also, in introduction section, they also addressed this issue very briefly, but here in details. Okay, there's the difference between introduction and literature review. So now in details, the broadly you have to justify your methods. Who else applied your method? Okay, in what context? And since this paper tries to contribute, it contributes by presenting a new a hybrid method in a new context. So this paper criticized to some extent previous methods. For example, previous studies have ignored, you see how politely this paper criticized previous studies. They didn't say previous studies is very foul, very bogus. No, this is not the way to criticize. We have to criticize politely. We are academician. We are not a politician, okay? So we can criticize, but politely. For example, we should not say no previous studies. We should not say, this is my first study. This is the first study I am conducting in the world. We should not say like this. Humble, polite, gentle, right? We can say very few studies, or we can say this issue is under researched, right, or limited discussion in the literature, right? So these are the ways we can alternatively criticize previous studies. So then you see, uh, it ignored, I mean, previous studies ignored. I mean, somehow it criticized the previous study, and why a new study is necessary. So it justifies logically. Fuzzy, why fuzzy set theory is important? Okay, so wherever there is a scope of citation, we should not miss this one, right? So again, if you want to see who else used fuzzy set theory, okay, in green supply chain context, right? Just come to Google Scholar. We already have written green supply chain. Then again quote fuzzy set theory. We want to see who else studied, I mean, they applied fuzzy set theory in supply chain, in assessing or evaluating or other issues, no problem. All right. Fuzzy set theory, see? They didn't mention in the title fuzzy set, but you see, inside the paper, they mention about the fuzzy set theory, right? And inside the paper is fuzzy set theory. Green supply chain, fuzzy set theory. Supply chain, fuzzy set theory. You see, if you know the process to justify, then it is easy to find the literature, right? So now, how many papers you need to justify this fuzzy set theory in your, in this section? So we have more than 2,000 papers, right? So we can cite few papers. So now, if we apply our golden rule, that is, cite within 5 years, then it is very easy how we can derive papers from within 5 years. For example, you see, Journal of Cleaner Production, uh, 2013. So it doesn't fall within the golden rule, right? So it, more than 5 years, right? So just, at the left panel, you see anytime there is a time frame since 2016, less than 5 years, right? We filter. We can sort it out very quickly. Again, we have more than 1,000 papers. So cite very recent papers. Very recent papers, you see, green supply chain and fuzzy set theory, right? We talk about evaluating, assessing, evaluating. This is our paper, by the way. Fuzzy set theory, green supply chain. They're the same paper, you know, we are focusing today. So this is how we can justify our statements very easily from using Google Scholar only, right? You need not to go to the Scopus or Web of Science. These are very expensive databases. Just focus on Google Scholar. You'll find all of your information. The fuzzy set theory was based on the membership function. You talk about more about the methods. Okay. Then it summarizes the previous, two paragraphs, two or three paragraphs. All right. Okay, you can do. So again, you see the style of summarizing. Always highlight the importance. Why this method is important, right? Or why the proposed study. I mean, the study is important, right? Briefly, the proposed method assists manufacturing or this study explore. Hence, this study can assist manufacturing firms to build their competitive advantage by ensuring proper implementation. So, you talk about the advantage of this theory. This approach can transform human linguistic perception into measurable. FIFA method has the advantage of prescribing managers specifically. They need to pay more attention by identifying critical GSP. So these are the you know ways you can summarize. Always try to highlight your study. I mean the importance of your study. Why it is essential. Essential to managers, essential to literature, essential to practitioners. Okay. Then proposed measures, or we call it the measurement structure. Okay. And this paper contributes by presenting a new measurement structure also. So again, it presents few studies in the leather industry. You see, since there are few studies, basically it criticizes the previous literature. It identifies the gaps in the literature. There are few prior studies in the leather industry in assessing GSP. Thus, there are few prior measures. So measurement also not available to adopt as a framework. So at the beginning, it identifies the gap in the literature related to the measurement structure. And previously, this section, it identified the gaps in the literature. Many prior studies evaluated, okay. So it basically identified the gaps related to the method. And this section, it identified the gaps related to the measurement scale, measurement structure, measurement framework, measurement model, or the instrument of the survey, whatever we call it. Survey instrument, right? Different names we have. But these all are related to measurement structure. So again, we are in the literature review section. Whatever we are presenting, be careful that these are not coming from my own opinion. Any bold statement, any important statement that I am going to present should be justified from literature. So that's the important issue. We need to keep it in mind always whenever we are writing this section. So here, since there are few prior studies in the leather industry in assessing, okay, basically it identifies the gaps in the measurement structure. So then again you see the citations. However, there is a need to organize this attribute accordingly to the viewpoint of suppliers, customers, logistics service providers, and manufacturers. So this is one of the important claim, that this paper made. So regarding the viewpoint, Chang present, okay, additionally propose. So basically, this section has already started developing the measurement structure. So that's a long section. Each and every attributes. These are called the attributes. And in other types of studies, like studies related to the PLS-SEM, structural equation modeling, we see uh, these are types of variables. So discussion about variables, discussion about the items. So this is a similar, kind of discussion. So this paper, it, it didn't use the regression model or the correlation. So instead, this paper, it used fuzzy set theory, and this structure is called hierarchical, structure. Normally, this type of method. I mean, this measurement structure. So normally, this type of papers, they use the attributes instead of variables or the items, right? So C1 basically stand for one attribute. I mean, they are criteria 1, criteria 2, criteria 3. Okay, just remember these are part of measurement scale. So the issue is here, how we have developed our measurement scale. We need to cite from previous studies. So each and every attributes, okay, has been cited from the literature. I mean, the previous studies, they use these attributes, right? So here, Anderson also proposed some attributes. So Lee also proposed some attributes. This way, different is a huge section actually, because it identified almost 34, 34 attributes. So each and every attributes need to be justified from previous literature. So previous literature already used this attribute. Okay. And finally, assessing green supply chain practice in the leather industry requires multi-dimensional attributes. Multi-dimensional attributes. Okay. In doing so, this study has reviewed existing literature also. Okay. Okay. Then let's go to the slide. So far we have discussed the essential components of the literature review section, as well as we have we have presented or discussed how our statements, our arguments, our methods, our definitions, terminologies, or hypotheses can be justified from previous studies. And finally, the ideal contents of the method section. Normally, what we present in the method: case study background, measurement scale, population sample, data and the data collection approach, data analysis technique, and then proposed analytical steps. This is the ideal scenario of a method section, right? But you may not find all these components in a single paper, may not find it. So, method section, again, you will find some papers, they present the industry background inside the method, or sometimes you will find it they present it as a case study instead of industry background. These are same, the what case you are going to use to test your method. That's the issue. Because the objective of this paper is to present a hybrid method. That's the contribution. So that's why they want to test the method, the method in a case study. So that's why the case background, the industry background is part of the method. So then you talk about the method, you need, you talk about the industry background. So it is very location specific. You need, your local information, government information, or newspapers, right? These are the issues. So then a committee of expert, part of this method, it uses the committee of expert. That's why it said, and the fuzzy set theory. So this section is you need to present in details what is fuzzy set theory, right? In details, you see, and few the few literature review here. Why few literature? Because there is a section in the literature review that we have already addressed, right? Proposed method, you remember? Proposed measures and proposed method means already this paper verified and established their method from previous studies. So now what they need in the method section to present in details what is fuzzy set theory, right? And what is IPA? Very, the few citation you'll find it. Instead, you'll find, and what is this in details, step by step. So this is part of your method. Normally, if you justify your method in the literature review section, okay, you need not to justify in method section in details. Just you in method section you will present what it is in details and as details as possible in the method section. So now we didn't talk about, today I didn't talk about the hypothesis development because this paper, it doesn't have any hypothesis. Okay, so you will find some papers like this one. This is a regression. They used regression. This PLS structure, right? PLS-SEM, partial least square structural equation modeling. So you'll find different types of papers. As I said earlier, you'll find different types of papers. So you'll find typically quite different, the style of writing literature review. But as I said, what are the essential components? I mentioned already, right? These are the essential components. So here, we want to see how they have developed the hypothesis and how they have justified or they have established the directions of their hypothesis. You see, this is also interesting. Introduction. Sorry. After introduction, they didn't present literature review. Instead, this is part of their, the context, rural and urban tourism. And basically, you see Georgetown, it is, in Malaysia. Okay. Residents' perception towards tourism development. This is part of basically uh, the literature review. So you see, this paper, they didn't present literature review, any title, but we can understand that this is part of literature review. So you see, citation, everywhere there is citation. Several previous studies have explored perceived impact of tourism. They justified. Who are the several? Why they had? Since you have stated several, so this is also important. When you say several at the beginning, right? You need to cite more than one paper because you said already several studies. Sometimes we say very recent studies at the beginning, but we cited 1960. It's not recent, right? So we need to be very careful what I am presenting, right? And we need to justify it logically and rationally. Okay. Now we need to see the hypothesis development, right? Factor influencing. You see, they have already started developing hypothesis, right? So you see, they have presented the positive effect of community attachment on residents' positive perception is stronger in urban as compared to rural context. So normally in papers that applies, apply PLS or structural equation modeling, we don't see, a null hypothesis or alternative hypothesis. Normally we see, one directional hypothesis. And why it is one directional, you see, it states the positive effect of community attachment. So this is one directional hypothesis. Okay. It says negative effect of community attachment have negative perception. Again, one directional hypothesis. Again, hypothesis 5. Positive effect of economic gain on residents' positive perception is stronger. Again, one directional hypothesis. So, you see, now the issue is how I claim this hypothesis. How did I find this direction of hypothesis? That's the question, right? Is it my opinion? No. I have rationalized it. I have developed it. I have concluded it. I have drawn it from these discussions from previous studies. This is all previous studies. Okay? These are previous studies. They studied these two issues, community attachment, also the urban or residence perception. Community attachment and residence perception in urban or in rural. Okay. Here you will find urban, here you will find rural. So they presented previous studies that they have studied and they have found this positive effect, negative effect. They found here positive economic gain, negative economic gain. So based on the previous studies, I have developed or I have concluded that my hypothesis is like this. I hypothesized. So after that, I will collect the data, right? And will, test my hypothesis, whether my hypotheses are true or not. My hypotheses are accepted or rejected, supported or not supported, right? These are the decisions we made basically after that. So again, you see, this type of paper, you need to justify your directions, okay, of hypothesis from previous studies. Okay, and this paper, you find they didn't present the proposed method as we said in the previous paper. Previous paper, they presented proposed methods, proposed measures in the literature review sections, right? And here they presented measurements and methods. Basically, they integrated it, okay, inside the method section. So here you need to justify from previous studies, because in the literature you didn't address these issues, so you have to justify it now, no problem. Okay, so if you have done it already in the literature, no need to justify it in the method section. That's the idea. Once you have done it in the literature review section, then you need not to justify it in the method section. But if you have not done it, then you need to do it at this stage. That's the another idea we get it. So that's the issue of hypothesis development, right? Okay, these are the tips, basically part of quality work. This part shows your sound understanding of the recent development. Be transparent, discuss in details. Okay, so these are the discussion about how we can address the literature review in a research paper. So thank you very much. If you have any question, please you can take any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Shamimul Islam, Dr. Muhammad Shamimul Islam. Uh,
Thank you.
I feel that you have presented very complex facts in a very simple manner. Although this is very
Okay,
hard,
thank you.
putting all those link, literature, and put this all this thing into hypothesis development in a logical manner. It's really tough job, but I feel that you have done it in very good manner so that it will be very understandable. And you have although I expect that you will speak a little Bangla, but yeah, we have some international audiences here. We know that, and I requested you previously that yes, you must focus more on English today because, as I've said, we have some international audiences from Malaysia, some Africa, few from Pakistan. Well, thank you. We have few questions, very few, and a number of
Okay.
questions indicate that it is very tough thing. I mean, literature is really tough job. Literature review or those things you have said, it's not understandable. Maybe to some extent, to the new researcher, it's very tough to connect how to put all those things in relation form. However, we have got some feedbacks, few questions from our audiences. I mean, those who are researchers or who have studied recently. We have got so many wishes from many more peoples. Head of HR, ICDDLV, many teachers because of you. You are very, very famous in our world because of the literature that we have published. So many
Oh,
people on
thank
it.
you.
It's unthinkable to us still now. By the way, I am coming to the points. I mean, question asked by our students, researcher or new researcher. The question you can see in the screen now is from Milan Rusdi. You can read from second line. I could not clearly understand which method should be chosen. He's asking about research method. Have any restriction applied in any method? If you can clear to him, make it clear, it will be very nice. He'll be grateful. He's actually asking question regarding his choice to make in between methods. There are so many. I mean, you know it very well. Can you answer it?
Okay, I mean the issue is about the which method should we use, right?
Yes. Yes.
So it depends. If your objective is to contribute methods, there are some papers they contribute only methods. So then you should not apply typical methods normally we find in my area. So in that case, we need to search for methods which is lacking in my area, but that method might be used in previous studies by in other areas, other context, like the method from I mean hospitality, in tourism, or method in psychology, for example. Okay, so in that case, I am applying combination of methods to contribute in my area. So that what is the objective of my paper? We need to first identify. If my paper is to replicate another paper, for example, I find a paper they studied from developed country context. So now I want to test this framework in Bangladeshi context or in my country context. In that case, normally we take the same method and the same framework. So there's an issue actually. Thank you.
Uh, okay, thank you, Dr. Shamimul Islam, and also thank you, Mr. Milan Rusdi. You have seen an appreciation from Fakhrul Islam Himel. You know him maybe so far. He is the teacher of
Yeah,
Bachelor
yeah,
of Drama TV serial.
yeah, yeah. I know him. Thank you very
Yeah.
much for your appreciation.
Okay, some specific questions are given here by Subrata Shah. He is an assistant professor in Kumilla University. The asked question you can see in screen.
Okay, in some papers they said about few results and findings. Where we will put it? If we write theoretical background, is it necessary to write separate literature review? Is theoretical background and theoretical framework same?
Last part might
No.
may be wrongly written, but other than last part, you can explain other two
Uh,
sentences.
so theoretical background and theoretical framework. So basically, related. These two are related, but there is differences also. So when we talk about theoretical framework, which we directly relate to the framework related to previous theories. And when we talk about research framework, research framework or conceptual framework, we normally mean that it is my framework that I am undertaking it. It is my framework. I designed it, I developed it. And related to the theoretical background, normally we need to justify the relationship of my variables. Like I have, independent variables and also, dependent variables, right, in my framework. So we need to justify the relationship using previous theories. Okay, normally under the title theoretical background, okay, sometimes we write it underpinning theoretical, discussion. So we want to cite the previous theories, whether these theories can explain the framework that I have developed or I have conceptualized. That's the issue. So if we did not find the theories, established theories, so in that case, we refer previous studies. So this is part of theoretical background. First, we need to cite the theories. If we find it is good, well justified, my framework. But if we didn't, connect properly with previous established theories, then we need to, cite some papers, some studies, and this is, part of your theoretical discussion. Thank you.
Uh, you can look at the next question by Ifad Mia Rafi. What is meta and integrate?
Meta analysis and integrative review. So meta analysis normally is part of a systematic literature review paper. Systematic literature review paper is different paper. Today we didn't address systematic literature review. Okay, systematic literature review has, different types of, ways of writing systematic literature review paper, and one of them is meta analysis. And in meta analysis, normally what they do some deep statistical analysis of the data they have, analyzed. So that's the issue.
The
And
next
regarding
integrated is
in, integrative review, basically I don't have much idea about this. Thank you.
yeah. Thank you. Again, Subrata Shaha, he asks another question: difference between conceptual frame, theoretical frame, literature review. So many questions. You can answer it.
These are basically very broad question actually.
Yeah.
Conceptual framework means this is my research model that I have conceptualized. So sometimes you will find papers, they at the title, in the title they call it conceptual framework. Means they confine their paper until the development of a conceptual framework. So the same framework, we call it research model when we go to the next stage. I mean, we collect the data and analyze. And the same conceptual framework becomes the research model. Okay? Then theoretical framework is different. The model established theories like the TAM theory, for example, technology acceptance model. You presented the TAM theory, and under this, you have given a title, the theoretical framework, right? But when you have done something, I mean, addition or deduction in the theoretical framework, you integrated moderator, mediator, or addition of another variable, then it becomes part of your conceptual framework, and that conceptual framework goes to the next of research model, okay, and that you use to, study empirically. So can we put all in literature review or theoretical background? Yes, we can. We can do it, no problem. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Next question is last part. You can see there are many may have lots of previous works on a topic. How many of those I need to mention in lit review? Is there any standard number?
Basically, I mean, three is standard. So,
Meaning,
sometimes we become confused. How many sentences should we put in a one paragraph, right? That's the issue. So, typically, there is an ideal scenario that they call it the 6 sentences, 4 to 6 sentences, 4 to 6 sentences. So now, if you add more citations, so the paragraph become, you know, it
uh,
grows, it exceeds, more than 6. So that's the issue sometimes. But so try to, justify properly, try to confine your citation within 3 to support one argument. So 3, 4
three
is
to
enough.
four. Okay.
3 to 4 to support only one argument, not the whole literature review.
Okay.
Okay, one
Yeah,
argument.
understand it. Right.
Yeah, yeah.
The next question, Mr. Asifur Rahman is a lecturer in DUP. He asks question: is it mandatory to have theory or theoretical support for all the research or in research?
Is it mandatory? It's a good question actually to have a theory or theoretical support. Basically, I have, I the paper I published in Cleaner Production. Okay, at first I didn't, provide the theoretical background. Okay, so then just one reviewer from 7 out of 7, just one reviewer out of 7, he mentioned that you can justify your framework properly, and he specifically mentioned by using stakeholder theory. You see, so out of 7 reviewers, only one, he suggested me to incorporate theoretical support in my study. And finally, I, integrated this into the paper to satisfy only 1 out of 7, because one reviewer is also important. If he rejects, then the editor may take it negatively. That's the issue. So it is better to provide theoretical support if possible. You will find there is a scope. If possible, I suggest strongly, because it is my experience, I strongly suggest to incorporate theoretical support. Thank you.
It means that if you will be set reviewer, you will be asking the same question as a reviewer. Where is the
Yeah,
theoretical support contribution?
normally I also, try to find this. Is there any gap here?
Yes, yes, we do the same question when being a reviewer. Also, we used to
Yeah,
ask the same question. We used to see whether there is any theory or any linkage. These are the
right,
basic
right.
points where we can ask question.
Yeah,
Well,
it,
other question asked by Mesbah Ahmed Alam Bhuiya. He wants to know head citation, tail citation. You have mentioned in your presentation.
okay, thank you. Head citation basically that starts at the beginning. So whenever we say something that Mr. Chang, Mr. Shamin, Mr. Aftab said something, so we need to, be very specific. What is the statement they have presented, right? So the readers also get a very clear message from the statement that Mr. Aftabuddin, he has presented this one. So there's the advantage of head citation. And when should we use head citation? If you justify your critical argument, your key points, your main argument, then we should use more and more head citations. Head citations. And tail citation, normally we see more than one authors, more than one studies, sometimes 3, 4, 5, but we are not clear what specifically they have said or they have mentioned in their paper. Very indirect statement normally, right? So that's why, The expert call it as a weak literature, but the head citation is very strong literature. That's the advantage and disadvantage. So whenever it is not necessary to justify your main argument. Just you are supporting a generic, very generic statement. So then you can present, tail citation, and you can present more than one. You can put it in your own citation sometimes.
Yes.
That's a strategy.
Okay. Other question we used to see when we started our research at the very beginning stage in Bangladesh. All the research used to write this way. Very few studies have been found in Bangladesh or in banking
Yeah, yeah.
sector industry. So you
So
are
this is
requested to answer it. Is it right or
so
just?
that's a good question, I think. So sometimes we claim that very few studies, but we didn't mention specifically actually in which area it is, very few. If you say, if you present only very few studies in Bangladesh, right? It is a very broad statement, very broad, and people will find more than 1,000 papers in Google Scholar. The studies from Bangladesh. Okay, now we need to be very specific in which area actually there is a gap from Bangladesh. For example, in my paper that I presented today, I said, yes, there is a gap from Bangladeshi context. Then what types of gap it is? The assessment of green supply chain practices from Bangladesh. The assessment of green supply chain practices from Bangladeshi context is lacking few studies. I didn't say this is for the first time I'm doing this. No, politely, few studies, there is lack of studies, right? This way. So we need to uh, be very specific which area there is the gap from Bangladeshi context. Then it would be okay. Otherwise, sometimes the reviewer they search the literature and they give you, more than dozen information. Then you say there is lackings. Now I find more than dozen papers for your evaluation. Please read it. Sometimes some reviewers they suggest like this. So be careful whenever you claim something like this. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, thank you. There is an appreciation from my teachers, from whom I studied or I understood, I learned what research is. Professor Dr. Mohammad
Thank you,
Haris,
sir.
he is impressed by your presentation. Well, thank you, Dr. Mohammad Samiul Islam. I feel that personally, I'm accessorized a lot by your
Thank
precious
you very much.
presence, by your humble presence, by your good presentation. And for the audience, I should say recently I have visited one defense, and there I have seen a researcher presenting. I mean, I'm not telling what kind of defense it was. Researcher was telling that there is no study in Bangladesh on this specific topic. Now I've seen that it was around 2 weeks back. I've seen that the recent literature he has used from 2016, and this paper so far is from him. I mean his citation. Then I was interested to ask him question how recent it was. I mean, he has said that there is no study in Bangladesh on this paper. If you are using a citation from 2016 and you are telling today that there is no paper have been found in Bangladesh, it is I don't know what kind of originality he or she is bringing in research. He is talking about from 2016 and now he's telling no study has been found. Now he's showing his originality based on 2016, whereas it is 2020 after 2005. And from your speech, from I mean Dr. Muhammad Shamim Islam's speech, we have heard or we learned today that the recent citations, I mean if we can bring citations from 2021, because 2021 paper from 2021 already available in net now,
Yeah, yeah.
it's better. And if we can collect it from 2020, it's good. And if you can collect from last 3 or last 5 years, it is the best approach internationally. Basing on that, we can say that if it is from 2020 that the gap is here and there, then we can say that yes, it is original, because in 2020 or 21 it is mentioned that there is no study or need to be studied this on this term. We can say that it's original or it's new. Well, we understand a lot from Dr. Muhammad Shamil Islam, and for the audience, I would say something about Dr. Shamil Islam. He is a trainer so far. He is good trainer. He used to provide training on literature review, on methodology, on research, and he will be staying here for very few days after. So we wish you very good luck, Dr. Muhammad Shamil Islam, and we will
Thank you very much.
seek our help
Thank
from you.
you for today's audience
Yes, and
for
also
their patient
students might
hearing.
be knocking you whenever they'll be facing problem in their literature review or research, because you are known by to us and among the audience by this time that you have published very good paper in three good journals. So far I know you some papers on the review still now. So you'll be having plenty of papers today, tomorrow, or day after tomorrow in upcoming days. So thank you, and thank you
Inshallah.
very much. We are now leaving from live. Thank you. Would you like to say
Okay.
something for the audience?
Yes, just one word. Thank you very much for being with us and for patient hearing.